Welcome to Nothing Without Us, stories and discussions about meaningful inclusion. We will talk about accessibility, true inclusion, and disability justice with stories, policy updates, discussions, and related commentary on the value of being accessible and inclusive. We believe life should be accessible for everyone, and everyone should be included in all aspects of life. I am your host, Annette Bourbonniere. I am a 70-ish-year-old woman with short gray hair and eyeglasses. I am sitting in a power wheelchair, and my service dog Kirby could show himself at some point during the podcast. This podcast is captioned. Please press the subscribe button at any time during the podcast if you have not already done so. It will not cost you anything, but it will help us make this podcast grow. You are also welcome to make comments in the chat and to give us feedback about what you do or do not like. We especially appreciate a thumbs up. This is another episode of the Crip the Vote subseries, where we invite office holders and candidates for office to discuss disability issues that may not come up during the regular campaign. In fact, they rarely come up during the campaigns. So today I'm honored to have Rhode Island's State Senator Alana DiMario from District 36, which includes North Kingstown, Narragansett, and New Shoreham. She is a member of the Senate Committee on Health, Education, and Human Services. Welcome, Senator DiMario.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay. So persons with disabilities represent between 20 and 25% of the U.S. population, making us the largest minority in the country. And yet discussion about disability is never included in campaigns or other public appearances. So this sub-series is geared to having people talk about it, talk about either things that you've done in the area or things that you should think about doing in that arena. So I'm going to start off with one where you introduced a bill that has become law, and this is it requires training for police to recognize and properly manage incidents when the victim, witness, or suspect has a cognitive or communicative disorder. Does that include all disabilities like autism, mental, then even maybe some substance issues?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So basically the problem was identified that there already was training included that specifically addressed people with autism, but also a very sort of narrow view of, or a narrow range of how people with autism can present in the world.
Right.
And so the need was identified to expand the scope of that training. The intention is to have experts inform the development of that training, which is still ongoing. So I can report back that it has not been implemented yet.
Okay.
That is still being developed. But the intention is to have as broad of a range of information as time constraints allow in their training to be presented around what they might encounter with a person with a communication disability, and how to be able to both identify that and work more effectively with that.
I think this is a great idea because police don't necessarily have all the tools they need.
Right.
And we don't want them to fall back on tools that are not appropriate for the situation if we can give them better tools to work with. Now, I know there is a what they call a CALIA certification that some police departments have, which is I'm not familiar with all of it, but I am familiar with the idea that their goal is to start to de-escalate a situation, no matter what the cause, so
Yeah.
that they can then, act appropriately. And I do know a Providence police officer that has been heavily involved in doing some of that training. and I
Yeah.
believe he will probably do some of this as well. Um, so, but you don't, police are not yet receiving the training.
Well, so you actually you hit on something I think important is that it has not yet been implemented as a statewide standard practice.
Right,
So what we know is that, different municipalities, as you just referenced, have have had received grants to receive trainings in different specialty areas, or have taken it upon themselves, due to maybe an incident they've encountered, to deepen
right,
their training or knowledge in an area. And so it's not yet happening across the board, but that doesn't mean that parts of this aren't already being implemented, in different municipalities.
right. I know that there have been some people that have been asking for this, for the campus police at URI.
Hmm.
The people I've met on the URI, police force have been really great. I mean, I have no
Yeah,
problem with that. But again, you're encountering situations that you may not be familiar with, that's not necessarily included in all training. Uh,
sure.
and I think giving them the tools they need to do the job, because it's not easier than it was a few years ago.
No, and
It's
I
far
think,
more challenging.
yeah. And I think, one of the important components of this is also recognizing that the person that they might be encountering might not necessarily be the person who was the subject of the call, or the person who is causing a disturbance or anything like that. It also might be somebody on that scene who was a witness to something very disturbing or traumatic, or,
Right,
potentially as a child, or potentially, has a relationship with a victim of something. And, so there's that dimension of it that we want to make sure is taken into account as well. That, we want to be supporting the people in our communities who have experienced traumatic events, and support for
right,
different people is really, dependent on making sure that you're meeting them where they are at, and giving them
right,
what they need in that moment.
right. Because there are a lot of people also that fall into the broader category of neurodiverse,
Yes.
and and they're put under a lot of stress in college,
Yes.
as everybody else is, but their ability to handle stress is different.
Absolutely.
And so, we don't want anybody to have more of a problem because they run into a bad situation, you know.
Absolutely.
Um,
And so I want to take a minute here just to share a little bit too about my professional background before coming into the Senate. So I've been in the Senate for the last 4 years, but for the last 2 decades, I have worked in the mental health field, and with a variety of populations. Most recently, I've worked just supporting kids and adults, and families in the community. But I also worked for a long period of time for a really intensive, in-home based program that supported children with developmental disabilities and their families.
right,
And, one of the things that prompted me to first run for office was thinking about some of the experiences that they had, those kids and families that I worked with, interacting with different systems, where the gaps were, how difficult advocacy was for them. And, that is something that I keep, I have specific faces for me come to mind when I think about, these kind of more abstract concepts, for sure.
that's great. 'Cause in Rhode Island, we don't have gaps, we have wide canyons.
That is
Um,
that is an excellent assessment, yeah.
and that's
The
on
gap
all
is like
areas
the
of disability.
euphemism.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's,
yes,
yeah, in all areas dealing with disability,
yeah,
um, so, but anyway, at least we get to talk about it and we can
yes,
bring it to light, because, I'm hoping more and more people will start listening to things like this. Um, so in the 2022 legislature, a bill that you supported, and I thank you, was passed to eliminate income and asset limits for working people with disabilities.
mhm,
It was intended to allow them to allow us, but not, it's never going to work for me because I'm too old now for the new one. You know, it doesn't seem to ever work for me. But, it's intended to allow us to keep Medicaid while working and earning a decent living. And for a lot of younger people, especially, I mean, the potential to have families was cut off by these income and asset limits.
Mhm.
Um, and and I'm sure you heard the stories of people who would accidentally earn $100 over the limit and lose everything, and then you have to go unravel it, try to get things back on track. And it's a major stressor.
Yes.
We're the only people that have to live under the cloud of don't succeed too much or we'll take the rug right out from under you. It
Mhm.
is an extreme stress. So I know that one thing happened is the state agency, EOHHS, Executive Office of Health and Human Services, named it after an already existing
Yeah.
federal program.
The Ticket to Work program,
Yeah,
right?
which
Yeah.
already has a set of complicated rules,
Yes.
but it is the federal program that enables the state one.
Yes.
But the state agency added its own set of complex rules. So it's scary for people with disabilities because they're so afraid they're going to make a mistake and lose critical benefits. You know, do you have any ideas how to work and make sure that people, you know, this added stress is part of our lives that
Yes.
doesn't need to be part of our lives.
Yeah.
I think um, I'm going to paraphrase the quote, but I don't know if you're familiar with the late great Judy Newman.
No.
One of her famous quotes was that disability is only a tragedy when we're not given the tools and barrier removal that we need to function in the regular world. Um, and and this is what happens. We have these, first of all, I think that in my own, okay, so it's a continuation of these poverty enforcing policies.
Mhm.
And it is, and it's an extreme stressor that it seems that government doesn't want to get rid of. It's like
Mhm.
they want to make sure we don't succeed.
Mhm.
And it seems like a very strange thing to do. It's also kind of backwards.
Agreed. Yes.
They're going to pay these Medicaid benefits if we're not working.
Right. Right.
So if we're working and you pay them, you're also collecting taxes. We're buying goods and services, which again is not only does that drive economy, but it makes other people earn more money and pay more taxes and buy more goods and services. It's a basic economics driver.
Yes.
And yet I think that EOHHS has more people geared to monitoring how much we earn
Mm.
and pulling that out than they do to have people to help us succeed.
Navigate. Yes. Yes.
Um, you know,
Yes.
I don't know if you have any idea of how we can get around that without
Yeah, I'm in complete agreement with you, and I think that this is actually a trap that I see us falling into across a couple of different sectors. Like, so, when you're talking about, for example, childcare benefit subsidies or,
yeah,
different types of assistance, like a lot of those same components you're talking about exist. One, I think we go by very outdated and unrealistic standards of what a livable amount of money actually is for a person. I mean, we're using things like the federal poverty limit to calculate
oh,
things
yeah,
that is so, I mean, when you look at what those actual numbers mean and you think about the context of what it costs to live here in Rhode Island, like it does not add up in any
doesn't compute. No,
right. And then you hear these things like, oh, and then the limit hasn't been increased in 20 years. 20 years ago, like think about what the cost of things were versus now, right? Like
right, yes, all
it
right,
does, it defies all logic. And then the other piece that you hit on that I think is important. Well, so first let me stay with that for a second. Sorry. What I was going to say is I when I have been trying to work on related issues, I've really been trying to focus on passing something that includes a sustainable plan for growing with the cost of living. So indexing things to, a certain inflation rate or whatever the appropriate thing might be, so that we
Right.
don't have to keep coming back and having the same fight to beg for just a little bit more, which by the time
Right.
we win that fight, that little bit more is outdated and not enough anymore.
Absolutely. And like, in that issue of income limits, there was also around the same time, we finally passed a bill to raise the payments to PCAs who have
Yes.
not received a raise in
Yes.
like 18 years.
Yes.
Now, they didn't raise it as far as they should have.
No.
I understand that this is going to go up again. I will believe it when I'm actually told I can pay my PCA, more money. But you talked about the federal poverty limit. See,
Yes.
it's never, it is what, that is the true description of it. The federal
Yeah.
poverty level,
Mhm.
it was established not as a goal, but as, okay, how do we study people that are not, living as well as other people? It was never intended to be a target. And it
Right.
has been set as a limit rather
Yeah.
than, you know,
A descriptor of a certain benchmark.
right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. Yep.
Um, and that is one of the things we have to address, is that this is not something we should be aiming for, something we should be enforcing. Uh,
Yes.
it is, and I don't know, I have two thoughts of it. First of all, I think that there are way more people cheating on their income taxes than there are on disability benefits.
Excellent point.
I think,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
the other thing is, after hearing some things coming out of some of the discussion, let's put it that way,
Mhm.
in certain stakeholder meetings and stuff, that it would be beneficial if the raises to executives in the Executive Office of Health and Human Services were tied to benefit levels and how many people they actually helped rather
Hmm.
than how many they held back. I
That is
think
an
that would,
interesting
right.
concept. Yeah.
Well, they all got their raises over those 18 years.
Mhm.
They collected, what, $3,000 bonuses just for getting their COVID shots? Oh, wait a minute. Nope, nope. They changed the language after, because that was, but they got bonuses.
Mhm.
In the meantime, we didn't have PCAs
Yeah.
because they had all quit because they couldn't live on it.
Mhm.
Um, so, I think that kind of adjustment needs to be looked at on an ongoing basis.
I agree. And you mentioned a couple of things there, both previously and just now too, around the idea of not only sustainable and predictable increases, but that idea of what happens when somebody who is operating under this system does receive a bonus, or some type of little bit more work or a little bit of overtime or something like
Right.
that, where in every other sphere, people are allowed to earn whatever they can earn. And you know what, if they get a little bit of extra and they can go out to an extra dinner or buy something, special for themselves, like
Yeah.
that's great, right? That's the
Start a family, buy a house,
right,
get a raise, get promotions, be
right,
congratulated for it instead of living
exactly.
in dread of it.
Exactly. And I think, the idea of having that very sharp cliff of, like, you've
Mm.
crossed this line by, $1. And so now you have to be kicked back and try to reprove your eligibility all over again.
Right.
I think that it works so much better when there is a longer off ramp, where
Right.
eligibility starts at one spot, but then we have a longer
Right.
tail for ramping, off services or off of
Well,
different types of benefits.
in some cases, though, maybe we shouldn't even be looking at an off-ramp. We should look at it as a wraparound benefit, so
Mm,
that in employment, if you're able to buy insurance from your employer, you use that first and then fall back on the Medicaid to cover
Mm,
things that are not, because some disabilities are very, very expensive.
yes.
Um, I think the last estimate that I had for people with spinal cord injuries, was in, depending on the level of injury, was between 80 and $120,000 a year of disability related expenses.
Mhm,
Much of that is not covered under traditional insurance.
mhm,
Um, and in some cases, when you have traditional insurance, once you've added the co-pays required to see a physician and a therapist before buying durable medical equipment, it's cheaper for you to buy it out of your own pocket because the
yes,
co-pays add up to more than if you just bought it, knowing what you need yourself. And I
yes.
didn't really think that one through until somebody that I know has just made that choice. As somebody
Mhm,
who's a very bright person and hardworking, and found that that's what's going to work best with her, because otherwise her insurance will require she does all these things, and then she's got to pay, the co-pays would be costing more.
mhm,
For
yeah,
people like me, the wheelchair that I have, and this is a federal Medicare problem, but 10 years ago, this same chair, the list price on it was about $30,000.
wow.
Oh,
Mhm.
yeah, today the list price on it is $78,000,
Oof.
which is, nothing went up that much in 10 years.
I mean, that's a luxury car payment every I mean, that's like a
Luxury car, yeah.
like
And for us, but see, in our case, everything is more expensive.
yeah,
So for example, anybody, people without disabilities can go out and buy an economical car that's easy on the gas and, and all of this.
mhm,
We can't do that. We
right,
have to buy a brand new van, and the cost of the conversion, even if you buy it converted, is about twice the cost of a brand new van. So we're
mhm,
starting off there. It's not necessarily fuel economical. The
yeah,
insurance is exorbitant because of the modifications, etc. So we don't really benefit from any of these things.
right,
And yet we live with that dread. If you make enough money to, buy some new clothes, oh, we're gonna pull out your Medicaid. And
yeah,
it's not a fair thing.
yeah.
You
And, another aspect of that that I'm familiar with, there's a, business in my district, called Oakley Home Access,
right,
um, that I've met
mm,
with them around, because they do, not just durable medical equipment, but the home modifications
right,
around
right,
ensuring that people can stay in their homes, can modify things to the way that they need to.
right,
And, I've talked with them about a number of different things, but one of them is the administrative barriers about getting what should be the covered Medicaid benefit of getting a
right,
lot of these things, and trying to figure out how to work with EOHHS to make sure that that is seamless, so that that is something that people can access their covered benefit. Because that's the other thing, is like, sometimes there's maybe quote unquote coverage for something, but if you can't find somebody who actually takes the insurance or will submit that
right,
reimbursement, then that's not a benefit you can actually use. um,
right,
and that's that's a real challenge.
right. I actually had some of that discussion with Senator Valverde, where there
Mm,
are vendors that don't want to do business in Rhode Island
yeah,
because Rhode Island makes it so challenging. Uh,
yes,
and I think it was also in the area of prior authorizations, which needs to be
yeah,
dealt with on a federal level as well as a state level. But in Rhode Island, it's a very high cost to do business in Rhode Island.
yes,
This shouldn't be, we need to ease that up so that we get to live regular lives.
yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
yeah. So, you definitely passed also, and I want to add this, it's not on the list of what we talked about, but you passed a number of bills to promote mental health.
Yes,
And one helps encourage diversity in social work licenses.
yes,
Nice. And another addresses the shortage of mental health counselors by addressing a two-tiered license.
Yes.
And the third increases access to professional psychological services. And to try to get, a better behavioral health system. That's also part of what should be coming out of the Olmsted plan. I don't know if you're
Yes.
familiar with the
Yes.
commission that's,
Yes.
um, I know that the actual enabling legislation that you tried to pass um, in the state legislature didn't make it through, and then you got the governor's directive,
Yes.
executive order, and so now it's in the hands of EOHHS.
Yes, and they have convened a group of stakeholders as well.
Right.
Yes.
But, you know, I want to be politic about this, but it's hard.
Yeah.
I've had a lot of experience dealing with the OHHS, both as a consumer, as a stakeholder, and as a thorn in each other's side. I've attended many stakeholder meetings, and I'm, working on my shyness problem, as you can see. Um, I'm not sure they always appreciate that. But the stakeholder meetings, and it was very clear in the legislation that people with disabilities had to be included in a meaningful way
Yes.
in the planning. And EOHHS does not understand how to do that. They
Mhm.
will hold these meetings and they will present what they've decided to do.
Mhm.
And it sort of almost becomes, and I accused them of this once and they said, oh no, that's not true. But it's like a sales pitch.
Mhm.
No,
Mhm.
no, no, this is what we're going to do. When it's not really in our best interest.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't know how to get that changed where the focus is on helping us instead of managing us and controlling us,
Mhm.
which is what the situation is now.
Mhm.
Um, but at the time, I mean, I have become quite jaded by my dealings with them, my experience with them. Their focus is, and they swear this never happened, but I know a whole bunch of people that were on the same call that will tell you that it happened, where, they were planning, I think it was a few years ago when they were planning on having Medicaid, managed care for dual eligibles, making it available
Mm.
to dual
Mhm.
eligibles. And they opened up the stakeholders meeting with a presentation of how low Rhode Island's per enrollee Medicaid expenditures were compared to the rest of the country. And it is below the median.
Mhm.
And they're like, that's not supposed to be the goal. This is not.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and we spent quite a bit of time talking about it because they'd say how they had a surplus, and they're like, no, you don't. We're
Mhm.
not getting critical services, so you don't have a surplus.
Mhm.
If you have money, you're not spending it on what you should be spending it on. And
Right.
and this is when we had gone without PCAs for about 2 years
Mhm.
because they weren't paying them. Once COVID hit, they all, took off. They're like, this is a lot of work for $15 an hour and a lot of
Yeah.
risk, etc. Because they didn't raise their pay for so many years.
Right.
So we need to find a way to convince them that they need to change their focus,
Mhm.
change the focus. And you're supposed to be helping people.
Yeah, it's not about running it like a business and
Right,
having a good bottom line or,
right.
that's not the goal. Yeah.
Right, because even if you think you don't have enough state money, and I'm going to argue that one,
Mm.
mm, when you're spending more state money, you're also able to pull in more federal money.
Mhm.
If you allow us to work and succeed, you're also going to pull in more tax money,
Mhm.
and you would help grow the economy as well.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
and I don't know how to make that happen, but I can guarantee you that if you're working on anything like that, you can always call me to come in and testify. I've got a whole bunch of other people that, we can tap into. I don't know if you saw how many of us supported the bill to raise the pay for PCAs,
Yes,
or how
yes,
many of us
that
were
was a
there, or how
very
many of
robust
us,
hearing. Yeah,
right, and the other ones were to, eliminate the income and asset limits.
yes,
I mean, we were in crowded hearing rooms,
yes,
sometimes overflowing, where we had to take turns coming in.
yep.
Um, and we can do that.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you for enlightening me to kind of what your experience has been with interacting with that. I am tangentially aware of the proceedings of the Olmsted Commission because I sit on the Governor's Council on Behavioral Health, and there is some
Right,
reporting out about the progress of that. And there have been some bigger conversations around the structure of EOHHS and kind of how you talked about the gaps or the canyons earlier, like how, under the current governance structure, there do seem to be some gaps about who is responsible for really fully implementing and fully realizing the potential of implementing programs in different areas. And so it sounds like this is also potentially a kind of an area where I would question, is there a way or an opportunity to kind of tighten up sort of who's in charge of making this work and what is their mission and what are their goals, because when I hear things like a presentation around, this is, we're succeeding because we're saving money, or we're succeeding because not a lot of people are signed up for this, or whatever the metric
right,
is, it makes me wonder what the stated mission is of that entity, that
right,
is
yeah,
responsible for
right,
overseeing that. And I would be absolutely interested in a further conversation about that.
sure,
Um, because that does not seem like a system that's working. I
right,
mean, I feel like there is such an opportunity to increase and improve what we do as far as I'll use the broad term case management, but thinking about that idea of, when we realized that, seniors were having a difficult time with choosing their Medicare plan, we, came up with this, whole system of being able to have these like navigators to help and coach and,
yeah,
whatever. When we realize that it's difficult to go on to, Health Source Rhode Island and pick an insurance plan, like again, we recognize that people aren't going to be experts in all of these different benefits and options and choices, and being able to really expand that idea of, person-centered case management, and making sure that we're not waiting for somebody to have a problem or to, be struggling with things to then, try to reach out, but instead there's more of that like proactive, like, where are you at? Do you have everything you need? What's a problem you need solved? How can we figure that out? I
right,
think that investing in those resources would also be something that really pays off.
right. In a lot of ways, we lack a lot of the infrastructure that's needed for a real good homestead plan.
Yeah. Yep.
We're trying to piece together some experiments now on transportation. But Rhode
Yes.
Island's system of transportation is, um, geez,
I
it's
know. That's
challenging. And
yes.
now with one artery out of service now for a couple more years, it's not better. And unless something dramatic has changed, and I've not heard that it has, the funding for RIPTA is backwards.
Yes.
The more it succeeds, the less funding it has, which is like, how does that even make
Yes.
sense? They
Yes.
tied it to the gasoline tax.
Yes.
It
So
doesn't make
yeah,
sense.
and I want to jump on that for a second, because that the paratransit system and the gaps in that system are an issue that was raised to me by a constituent a few years ago,
Right,
as well as some other advocates. And it has been really illuminating, to work through this
Right.
process of trying to study, what are these gaps? What would it take to create a truly statewide paratransit system that doesn't leave people so that, oh, if a bus route changes, as I heard from, from one person who had very carefully chosen both their workplace and the apartment they were living in, a bus route changed and all of a sudden they lived outside the ADA corridor
Right.
and couldn't get to work anymore. They were essentially
Oh,
stranded in their home.
right.
Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Before I
So it's
continue.
not just the paratransit, because
No,
it is our overall transit system.
yes. And
We're
so
a
it
small
is
state. We should be able to fix that.
absolutely. Yes, 100%, and that is that we are in total alignment here, because in working on this issue, it has been my intention to show that, first of all, there's demand for public transit from corner to corner of this state.
Oh,
That
absolutely.
if that it is possible to build out a network of truly statewide transit, and that not only, I mean, this is one of those things that, like, investing in this, I think, is such an exciting opportunity, because not only does it help people with disabilities, not only does it help people who, are economically challenged and maybe don't have a car, or can't or won't drive for different reasons, it has environmental benefits. It will put us in a much more competitive place when it comes to attracting and retaining younger workforce. If you look
Right.
at some of
Yeah.
our surrounding cities, like, that is one of the things that people look for. People don't love driving. That's not something
Yeah.
that, not everybody wants to own multiple cars in their family and drive every single place they go. And
Right.
being able to really embrace the idea that investing in that, in a
Right.
truly functioning statewide transit
Right.
system that's usable for the average Rhode Islander, it will pay off for everyone. And I'm really excited about that possibility.
Right. When I talked with Congressman Amo for this show about a month or so ago, I guess was when I talked with him. One of the things I asked him, is there a way we can tap into the infrastructure funds
Mm,
and start doing something in that line? I mean, I've traveled I've been to conferences in cities, and like, I love it if I have to go to DC.
yeah.
Because,
Yep.
what do? I just get on the metro, I roll on, roll off. It comes every 10 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever. You can get anywhere you need to go.
Mhm.
And it's like, oh my gosh, this is so great. Um,
And it's so great. I mean, and now even right on your phone, you use Google Maps or whatever, and your public transit routes are integrated into that. It'll tell you which
right.
train you have to take and where you
Yeah,
switch, and how many more minutes till that train comes. I
yeah.
mean, yeah, if we were able to have a truly statewide transit system, I think it would just be such a game changer for the whole state.
It would be good for business. It would be good for people with disabilities. It would
Yes.
put us on an equal footing with other people.
Yes.
So we don't
Yes.
have to worry about the paratransit and what's available. I mean, we may need that for some specialized populations, but in general,
Yes.
most of the disabled population could use the regular transit system now.
Yes. Yep.
Um, people like me wouldn't have to spend huge sums of money to get around.
Yes.
Um,
Yep.
so because even the ride vans and stuff like that, they're not always, while I understand how it works over the ADA and the corridor, but most of the wheelchair tie downs are over the rear axle,
Mm.
which is when I was just paraplegic, I found it challenging then. I mean, I had one time a driver that just was driving such that at one point I was just hanging over the seatbelt
Mhm.
because I had just been knocked out of my chair.
Unbelievable.
Other passengers screamed at the driver to stop.
Oh,
Um, and now I wouldn't be able to handle it at all. Uh,
right. Right.
so there is that, where getting on a train, getting on the metro was just so simple, because you're not
Yes.
sitting over an axle, you're not doing that bumping and all of that. So it, and we're so small, it really
I know.
is. And it would then make us a good connection between, like, the Massachusetts system and either Connecticut and even New York. I
Yep.
mean, we could,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yep. I think that we are not fully realizing all of the benefits of that. And
Right,
I say, I've said this often, but like I take a field of dreams approach to public transit, like build it and they will come. Like,
yeah,
you can't, as you referenced, you can't build a system that isn't really functional for most Rhode Islanders and then say, look, no one uses this.
right,
Of course they don't, like,
exactly,
because you can't get anywhere, especially when, I mean, I represent South County. We are not the most underserviced area in Rhode Island because there are some cities and towns that RIPTA doesn't even go to at all.
right, I
But
know,
certainly public transit is not functional for
no,
working, living, community access use and things
no,
like that down where we are. So
no, exactly, and I live in Newport,
yeah,
so then,
yeah,
I mean, they did run a free, trolley during the summer for, beaches and mansions, for tourism, but, to be able to say, I'm gonna get to work at 6:30 in the morning,
yeah,
not gonna happen.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and we need to build that in. People, um, need that in their lives, and we can
absolutely.
do it.
I agree. I completely agree.
So
Um,
thank you for coming and joining me today. People with disabilities, need to have our voices heard. I appreciate, you listening to that and helping make that happen and knowing that you have allies in the disability community for working on the things you work on. Okay, and so thank you for listening. I'm Annette Bourbonnier from Nothing Without Us, Stories and Discussions of Meaningful Inclusion. Please hit the subscribe button and give us a thumbs up. That and your comments will help us grow. Tell us who you want to hear from and what the issues you want to hear discussed. I will be happy to forward any questions you send me for Senator DiMario to her. Make sure you check out the earlier interviews with our congressman and with Senator Whitehouse, and a recent interview with other representatives in our state legislature. Tell your friends about us so we can grow. You can find us on patreon.com and on YouTube, and you can follow me on LinkedIn, X, formerly known as Twitter, Instagram, and Threads. But remember, and I'm saying this on all the crypto vote things, our democracy more than ever depends on everyone, and I do mean everyone, getting out and voting. This is your power. It's our right. It's our responsibility. You can't complain about the results unless you do. So until the next Nothing Without Us, I'm Annette Bourbonnier.